Hi. I was so nervous that I would have to speak after Philip Gorovich, and I'm so glad that I get to speak after a song about butts. It's like the tone has just been set perfectly for what I'm going to talk about. I have notes because I make notes. I'm anal like that. All right. So there's this one moment that occurs in a lot of films about scientists, and it is probably my least favorite moment in all of cinema. I'm dissatisfied by it, profoundly dissatisfied by it, to employ tonight's theme. And you will, when I describe it, recognize this, I'm sure, because you've seen it a dozen times over the years. And this horrible moment, it goes like this. Our character he's a scientist of some kind. He's a mathematician if we're watching a drama. He's a physicist if it's a sci-fi movie, a biologist if it's a zombie thing. Our scientist is almost always a man, which is sort of equally annoying for a whole different set of reasons. And this character, the scientist, he'll deliver a sort of brief, pretty reasonable paragraph of technical explanation about some plot point. So he'll use a few sort of obscure, kind of jargony scientific words that he'll throw in there for verisimilitude, but the basic point is pretty clear and comprehensible. It's always something like, we're going to need the warp drive to go through the wormhole, or the terrorists have an unbreakable 512-bit encryption key to hide the location of the stolen nuclear weapons, or traveling back in time, we've created an alternate universe timeline, something, it's like that kind of thing. So the point is, it's some scientific concept that is both explicable and quite literally has just been explained. So then what happens is a scientist character, he says this, and then he has a side character, sort of the scientist, like normal dude buddy, and he'll make this incredulous face. And then he goes, "Whoa, Doc, say that again in English." You've seen this so many times, I promise you, in movies and television shows, and I hate it. Oh God, I hate it. I hate this moment to the core of my being, and I often feel like my entire, and I will note, exceedingly brief career has been spent sort of warring against that exact moment. Here's why. I think it is so condescending to the audience, because it's essentially saying all that mumbo jumbo that guy's just been blathering on about, we as filmmakers don't understand a word of it, and we don't really care to. It's more to the point, like, we don't really care if you understand it or not either. It's this moment of sort of rank anti-intellectualism in the worst way, because the whole joke is predicated on the idea that only some sort of like sexless, geeky egghead would ever bother to kind of care about what like a scientist would say. The moment never treats its characters with respect, and in so doing, I don't think it treats its audience with much respect either. So what I sort of want to do in the next few minutes is to kind of unpack this a little bit and sort of talk about the problems, perils, and opportunities you sort of find when you're kind of writing and telling stories about exceptionally brilliant characters. As a writer, how do you sort of deal with the challenge of writing about people who are smarter than you? How do you convey in sort of prose or dialogue the mind of a genius when you yourself are not one? How do you kind of respect the audience's intelligence while still sort of describing the kind of superhuman intelligence of the person you're writing about? And so this came up, obviously, recently over many, many sleepless nights when I started writing The Imitation Game. And so the film, really quickly, it's about the life of the English mathematician Alan Turing. For those who don't know, he's the man who invented the machine that sort of would become the computer. He was then recruited to break the Nazi Enigma code during the Second World War, which he did sort of thanks to his miraculous machine. Only after the war, it turned out there'd been this secret he'd been keeping from the government the whole time, which is that he was gay. And after he was caught having sex with another man, he was arrested, convicted of gross indecency, which was the statute in Britain at the time, and he was chemically castrated by the government until he finally killed himself at the age of 41. It's a feel-good film for the whole family. Take everybody. Yeah. Anyway, it's in theaters in like 2 weeks. Okay, so the point is, I'd been obsessed with Turing since I was a teenager. You guys might find this sort of terribly hard to believe because I seem so cool. But when I was a teenager, that was not the case. I was a tremendous computer nerd. And so among kind of nerdy, awkward teenagers, Alan Turing is this patron saint, right? The outsider's outsider, brilliant beyond his time, a life tragically cut short by sort of insane prejudice. And it was this process where once I became a writer, kind of once every year or so, I would sort of go to my agents and say, hi, it's Graham. Yeah, no, that's my name. You have forgotten who I am. I really want to write this film about a gay English mathematician in the 1940s, and at the end, he kills himself. And you could just see the dollar signs floating through everybody's eyes, right? It was like huge Hollywood production. No, that's not at all what they said. But then, about 4 years ago, I published my first novel. It's this mystery novel about the life of Arthur Conan Doyle. And then, in this stroke of crazy luck, I met the producers of our film at a party. They told me they had the rights to the Alan Turing story, and I basically began stalking them to a degree that would be considered criminal were I not so unimposing. But I basically sort of lied my way through an interview. I pretended to be this kind of mathematics expert, which I'm not. But they bought it, and it all worked out, and I got to write the movie. So, okay, great, right? I have my dream job. I'm writing it on spec. I'm writing for free. Doesn't matter. This is like my dream thing. Writing a script about Alan Turing. Only there's sort of this little problem. Because Alan Turing was unquestionably one of the great geniuses of the 20th century, and I'm not. I'm like a writer from Chicago. So what are the sort of techniques you can sort of use to even approach something like this? So when I started, what I realized was that if you want to sort of write about a genius, the best place to look for inspiration was the work of the person who'd kind of created the best fictionalized account of genius in the last 100 years, which I would argue is Arthur Conan Doyle and his Sherlock Holmes stories. So here's the thing you need to know about the relationship between Arthur Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. It was not a friendly one. Doyle loathed Holmes. He regretted having created the character almost instantly. Even after the first Holmes story came out, Conan Doyle was kind of shocked at the popularity Holmes was having. Conan Doyle's other sort of more serious fiction was ignored, and the public seemed to be buying these like cheap, manipulative, obvious, goofy mysteries. And they kept gobbling them up, and Conan Doyle couldn't sort of resist the checks that kept coming to him. So he kept writing, people kept buying them, and he was dumbfounded. And sort of Holmes's popularity kind of outshone his own. It was Holmes's name on everyone's lips, not Doyle's. There's this amazing story that I love where Doyle's own mother we have these letters. She sends him a letter kind of asking if he'd sign a few copies of one of the books for a friend of hers. He writes back, he says, sure. And his mother writes back to say, great, but can you sign the books Sherlock Holmes? And he's like so offended because like his own mother doesn't even want him to have his own name. Right. So Doyle's antipathy towards Holmes it starts to extend towards the audience of gullible rubes who keep buying these like stupid stories. He got really kind of antagonistic towards his audience, and sort of it was like, don't they know it's just a trick? Holmes isn't a real genius. Like I just made him up. And so what he did, kind of as like a screw you to his fans, is he actually wrote this very short piece in which he tries to make the trick of the Holmes stories plain. So it's a really short story. It's called How Watson Learned the Trick. It's not usually published with the Holmes stories because it's kind of so aggressive and strange, and it's like a page long. But you can Google it if you want to find it. And I think it is probably the most intentionally designed to piss off fans piece I've ever seen from kind of a major popular writer. The only thing I can compare it to is sort of the end of The Sopranos, maybe, in the idea of like sort of castigating your own audience for enjoying the thing they're in the act of enjoying. So starts, Watson and Holmes are sitting down to breakfast like they always are. Watson gives Holmes a curious look. He says, I was thinking how superficial are these tricks of yours, Watson says, and how wonderful it is that the public should continue to show such interest in them. And Holmes sort of says he agrees. Your methods, says Watson, are easily acquired. No doubt, responds Holmes, and then he sort of dares Watson to try. So Watson takes the bait. He's always taking the bait. He looks Holmes up and down. He makes a series of kind of very Holmesian deductions about what Sherlock has been up to that morning. He can tell that Holmes was preoccupied when he got dressed, that he was unsuccessful on a recent case, that Sherlock has recently begun to dabble in the financial markets. And he determines all this sort of from the state of Holmes's shave, from an envelope he sees on the table, and the condition of the day's newspaper, respectively. So it's like perfect Holmesian moment of like glancing over all these small details, which the reader would ignore, but from these small details making a series of sort of brilliant genius deductions. Only this time there's a twist. Watson's completely wrong about each of his inferences. And so to shame Watson and then the audience, Holmes details shows how what Watson's observed can be explained by totally different means. So the fact that Holmes hasn't shaved doesn't mean he was preoccupied. It means he'd lost his razor. So forth. The same set of mundane observations can be spun an infinite number of ways to create an infinite number of deductions. So which one's right? And the point of the story is that it's totally random. Doyle stacks the deck in Holmes's favor. Anyone in Holmes's shoes, any reader, could make any number of similar inferences that have equal chances of being correct. All Doyle has to do as the god of this fictional universe is to sort of slip Holmes the right answers under the table. And so it's kind of, my question was what I could learn from Doyle's angry explication of his own methods. How should I apply them, as Holmes would say? And what I sort of got from this, and what I would suggest, the lesson here is one of openness. That one should give the reader or the audience all of the information and not hold anything back. And I think Doyle's great discovery was that intelligence is not the accumulation of data. It's deciding what the data means. Holmes has the same tools at his disposal that you do. He almost never knows anything you don't. It's only that he looks at the shared information and sees things that you never could. If any of you play poker, this might make sense. I love poker. I play a lot of it because it deals with all these sorts of issues. So any of you who play Texas Hold'em will get this. The whole idea is that you're not playing your opponent's cards, you're playing the community cards. The real game isn't what she knows that you don't, or what you know that she doesn't. The game is in what you both know, but you deploy to greater effect than she does. And so that's one of the things I love so much about Doyle. He doesn't portray genius in the say that again in English way. His moment of genius doesn't make you think, only some crazy egghead would ever think of that. Doyle makes you go, God, why didn't I think of that? And so that's one of the things I found so rewarding in writing about Alan Turing, that trying to convey his intelligence on screen was a democratizing act, that opening his one-of-a-kind up to an audience was about letting people in, not about shutting them out. That genius can be best conveyed by sharing intelligence, not by hoarding it. We're all kind of in the business of smarts together in a certain way. So I write the script. After a few years of kind of Hollywood twists and turns, it does actually turn out that getting a movie about a gay mathematician financed is not as easy as it might appear to be. We got to make our film, though, and there's sort of a funny personal code of this. So my first book had been about this genius novelist, Arthur Conan Doyle. And then I write a script about a genius mathematician, Alan Turing, for which I used kind of Conan Doyle's genius as inspiration. Then we made our Turing film, and so who is the actor who gamely strides in front of the camera to embody Turing? It's Benedict Cumberbatch, an actor kind of no stranger to Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes himself. So we're on set one day, and we're shooting a relatively technical scene. There's kind of a bit of business with one of the Nazi Enigma machines that they use for the code. There's some quick dialogue about the math. Right before the cameras start rolling, Benedict calls me over, and he says, I think I can't do his English accent, sorry. He's like, I think you've made a mistake. And I said, what? And he sort of goes off on this like long technical ramble where it's really complicated. The machine in front of him has 3 rotors, not 5. How many plugboard cables would you use? And it's a whole thing. But he thinks we're missing a 0 at the end of the line. Is it a 1 and then 18 zeros, or a 1 and then 19 zeros? So we both get a piece. We're going back and forth with this, trying to figure it out. Like, did I make a mistake? We're both trying to do the math in our heads. And he finally goes on this long thing about it has to be 18 zeros and blah, 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 and here's why, and doing all the math. And finally I have to stop and suddenly go, wait, Ben, say that again? And I've like become the very thing that I hated so much. But that's, in becoming the thing that I hated so much, it was sort of a lovely experience that try as I might to avoid it, like we're all kind of the normal person buddy in someone else's story of genius. So, thanks.